Campers, it's me, Ari Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees. From Friday the 13th, I'm here with AJ, and he's got the juiciest slice ready for you. It's dripping with blood. Jason never dies.
Salutations all! Happy whatever time of year it happens to be when you're seeing this. And welcome back to my ongoing horror jamboree.
Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants.
This, robe is the fanciest garment I own, unless you consider Hawaiian shirts fancy. Anyhow, the holidays are once again upon us, and that means spiked eggnog, obscene, truly profane phone calls, and drunken sorority girls getting picked off one by one.
That was a good one.
This year, to commemorate that it has been 50 years since its release in the US on December 20th, 1974, I decided to discuss a classic that hasn't always been recognized for its greatness.
I don't think you could pick your nose without written instructions.
Fair enough, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but all things considered, I won't be deterred.
You'll get your chance, smart guy.
You're damn right. So, what do you get when you mix a dash of urban legend, a cup of severe mental illness, and a sprinkle of menacing phone calls? 5 years after this film, we got a heady mincemeat pie by the name of When a Stranger Calls. But if you look back to the year that gave us the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you get the film that made telephones ringing as terrifying as the prowlers placing the calls. The low-budget gem and slasher progenitor, Black Christmas. This is a film that has in recent years rightfully been analyzed ad nauseum.
Well, I'm sincerely glad to hear that, for all our sakes.
Still, since it's one that was initially mischaracterized as basic violent and exploitative schlock, covering it is right up my alley, and this is one that's been on my mind for a long time, full of many interesting lines of inquiry.
What the goddamn to do?
So pull up a rocking chair, grab a candy cane, make sure you suck it to a sharp tip, you may need it for defense, and join me as I visit the Pi Kappa Beta sorority house around Christmas time.
I'd rather face the killer.
Thanks a lot for checking this out. I deeply appreciate it. If anything about it trips your fancy, please like, subscribe, and share.
Oh, yes.
Directed by Bob Clark, a rare filmmaker whose career ran the entire gamut. Written by Roy Moore, this is his magnum opus, and starring the unmatched Olivia Hussey.
Hello?
As fetching and strong-willed Jess Bradford, it's kinda great her sweater includes hands seemingly clutching her. He once saw Infinity itself, Kiardulia.
Well, you scared the hell out of me, too.
As the angsty,
Tell them I want all records on a Peter Smythe.
that guy. She'll always be my Lois Lane.
You really shouldn't smoke, Miss Lane.
Kind of crazy to think there was a time the female lead
Don't tell me lung cancer, right?
in a family film would be depicted smoking.
Well, not yet, thank goodness.
Margot Kidder,
Come on, this is a sorority house, not a convent.
as sassy bad girl in Heavy Smoker Barb. She won the role because Gilda Radner got on Saturday Night Live and has the distinction of being the only performer to return for the remake, the delightful Andrea Martin.
Call me if there's any news.
As kind-hearted but no-nonsense Phil. She got to play one of the killers in the underappreciated Curtains, Lynn Griffin. As first victim Claire Harrison, he's the star of one of David Cronenberg's underappreciated classics, The Brood, a film that has imagery you'll never forget. Art Hindle,
Nash, you stupid son of a bitch, you got a big goddamn mouth!
as Claire Special Fella, the rightfully hot-headed Chris. Her performance is pure delight, Marion Waldman. As slightly pickled Mrs. Mack, oh, she's a fine old bird. Lost in the mix, James Edmond. As the unfortunate Mr. Harrison, the incomparable John Saxon,
Don't you think we ought to look into it? Well, he's obviously upset about something. We having a fight?
As a lawman who should maybe ignore his hunches, Lieutenant Ken Fuller, a guy obviously willing to take one for the team, Douglas McGrath.
Okay, now calm down, lady. Let's have the story.
As consummate bungler Sergeant Nash.
You, shut up.
He reminds me of someone, but I can't quite put my finger on who. I'm sure it'll come to me. And Nick Mancuso, Albert J. Dunk, and a series of mysterious uncredited performers who patched together create a vocal but shadowy figure.
No, I have some stuff to do. Claude! Billy.
As a quirky, unidentified psychosexual killer possibly named
Billy. Billy?
but will herein be referred to as the Moaner.
Now get on with it.
A vague silhouette peers into an enormous sorority house, with security lacking.
Who left the goddamn front door open?
It is no wonder the dark figure is able to climb a trellis. Without eliciting notice, and enter the house's attic. With the proclamation,
All the men out. Come on. Bye-bye. No offer.
the interloper drops down like a silent little spider.
Hi, Mom. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Using next-level stealth to soundlessly repel as he eavesdrops on Barb's phone call.
Oh, come on. I'm not drunk. No.
Wonder if there's any greater reason why he's checking the status of the phone's availability. Shortly thereafter, the young ladies get a call from an old friend.
Hey, quiet! It's him again! The Mona!
When his garbled noises give way to coherent speech,
Pretty big cunt. I make it pretty big. I'm like a tuning fork, baby.
the Moaner makes a compelling argument
Not bad. Suck my juicy cock.
that he's a complete pervert.
I'll come over and you can suck it.
Always short on patience, Barb's amusement runs thin.
You want my fat cock too? Oh, why don't you go find a wall socket and stick your tongue in it? That'll give you a charge.
And she's not afraid, perhaps bolstered by liquid courage, to speak her mind.
I'll stick my tongue up your pretty pussy. You fucking creep!
Because screaming highly inappropriate obscenities in a girl's ear is clearly the way into her heart and knickers. The call ends with, to some, a sobering threat.
I'm going to kill you.
Few take seriously,
Ah, super tongue strikes again.
least of all Barb.
Fastest tongue in the West. That was sick.
Claire recognizes folly in her approach,
I really don't think you should provoke somebody like that, Barb.
reminding everyone,
But you know that town girl was raped a couple of weeks ago.
only for Ms. Snark to reply,
Darling, you can't rape a townie. You really are too much, Barb.
early on, just conversationally, this film broaches a lot of subject matter far more taboo in 1974, and there's much more to come. That's brave for what is at its core meant to be an entertainment, but then tapping into the human thirst for drama and gossip is a surefire way to maintain audience interest.
I'll see you later. I'm gonna go pack.
Only a little miffed at Barb's vulgarity, Claire goes off to pack as their house mother arrives home, isolating the conscientious young woman from the others as they carry Mrs. Mack away on a wave of good cheer, intent on lavishing her with Christmas presents.
Mrs. Mac, come in the other room. We've got a surprise for you. Come on.
After petting her pussy,
Mrs. Mac's been looking all over for you. Oh, little puss. Hello.
nice-looking cat, Claire gradually becomes cognizant of what she perceives to be someone standing in her closet.
Who is that?
Apparently, curiosity not only kills the cat, but the cat lover.
Who is it?
Well, doesn't bode well for me.
It's really beautiful.
Meanwhile, the other sisters give Mrs. Mack some bribes. Christmas presents.
You girls are just too good to me. Oh, nonsense, Mrs. Mack.
That is a rather dismal nightgown, but if that's what it takes to keep her off their backs, I say boffo.
Hello?
Hello, is Jess there, please?
Another call is answered with dread, but as it turns out, it's only Jess who need dread.
Yeah, wait a second, Peter. Jess, it's for you. It's him.
As she has issues better spoken of in person.
Why don't you tell me now?
Because I want to talk to you face to face.
But after several days of practicing for a music recital, boyfriend Peter is exhausted, and he's
Not in the mood to be playing games.
Jess won't crack and says they will speak tomorrow. Peter apologizes for being brusque, using his studies to shirk responsibility, and she is forgiving.
It's okay.
I love you.
I know.
Something tells me Jess is over whatever infatuation she had for Peter, despite the inconvenient news she has for him, like a particularly cruel Secret Santa gift. Everything about her body language screams deep discomfort.
Well, good night.
Next morning, Claire's father, Mr. Harrison, appears to collect her, and with his daughter missing, finds plenty of reason for disapproval.
I'm very disappointed in this atmosphere. I intend to do something about it.
Claire, of course, is hanging out up in the attic, as dear old dad goes to search her out. Jess gives Peter the big news.
I'm pregnant.
Instantly on board, he's elated.
Jess, that's fantastic.
Jess not so much.
I don't want it.
You don't want it?
Not an easy decision, but one she feels is necessary. Jess has her plan mapped out.
No. I'm going to have an abortion.
Yep, unless there's a major overhaul, it would seem their relationship has run its course.
You can't make a decision like that. You didn't even ask me.
I wasn't even going to tell you.
Peter feels he has a say in the matter.
Don't you ever consider anyone but yourself?
If you want to get anywhere with a woman, that is not the tack to take.
I've thought this out very carefully, and I know what I'm going to do.
I will say this, Jess's timing could have been better.
Do you know how important this afternoon is to me?
But she might be making a greater point about the fragility of their union, and what he should focus on, himself, his aspirations.
Yes, I do.
Understandably huffy, he sends her away, but not without some departing words.
I want to talk to you tonight.
There's nothing to discuss.
The note they end on is kind of ominous.
I think there is.
I'm not going to change my mind.
We'll see.
What does that mean, we'll see? Jess might want to bring a friend along.
Oh, hell, not again.
She's the unfortunate recipient of another bizarre phone call from the moaner.
I'm sorry, you have the wrong number.
What your mother and I must know is...
With each deranged revelation or exaggeration or outright deception,
Where did you put the baby?
You've got the wrong number.
Where did you put Agnes?
it's more and more apparent either this guy is the granddaddy of all trolls, or truly bonkers.
What your mother and I must know is...
Over at the police station, the ladies voice their complaints about the moaner and report Claire missing.
You know, for a public servant, I think your attitude really sucks.
But find little help. So when Barb recognizes a prime opportunity,
Could you give me the number at the sorority house? Please.
she seizes it without remorse.
Fellatio 20880.
Her intent to set up some future humiliation.
It's a new exchange, FE.
Since Sergeant Nash isn't up on the current sexual lingo.
It's a new one on me.
Tricky trickster, Barb sells it so well, he's none the wiser.
Thanks.
Don't mention it.
Such delight making mockery of an annoying cop. Her Christmas isn't going to be so bad after all. No, wait. Whoa, what if Jason wore that hockey mask?
I think they figured she was shot up somewhere.
The production's Canadian roots are showing like a peroxide blonde's a week out from the last dying. Jess solicits Chris to see if he knows where Claire wound up, and when he proves as clueless as to her whereabouts as everyone else, tells him about their minimally successful visit to the police station.
They didn't take it seriously. I think they figured she was shot up somewhere.
Recital time, Peter puts on his big life-deciding performance. For a guy supposedly passionate about becoming a concert pianist, he sure plays like an asexual fucks. As a function, not a pleasure. More like pulling teeth in lovemaking. It's a proficient but joyless exercise in smashing the right keys. He seems to lack a certain grace, ease, and artistry of playing that determines pretty quickly he's no virtuoso. In fact, far from. Blowing it, he basically chokes, playing with none of the finesse necessary to succeed. Perspectives, his aspirations were just dealt a major blow. But it could be worse. Not so far away, a mother is facing her worst fear head on.
Well, is it really so unusual for her to be just a few hours late, Mrs. Gray?
Further complicating matters, a MacGuffin is introduced in the form of a missing 13-year-old named Janice.
Oh, yes, she should have been home at noon.
Right before Chris, on Claire's behalf, proves the squeakier the wheel, the likelier it is to get the grease.
Nash, you stupid son of a bitch, you got a big goddamn mouth!
Between a missing middle schooler and a college student, the police have no choice. They can't just sit on their hands. Relatable to any parent who has lost a child for any amount of time, Mr. Harrison is left with a quandary.
I feel I should be doing something, but I don't know what.
Well, why don't you just try to stop worrying?
Easier said than done. At least he has distraction. Apparently, there's a certain species of turtle
that can screw for 3 days without stopping.
And Barb has immured herself so deeply in the drink, she wants to use the factoid to make a point.
You believe that? 3 days? I'm lucky if I get 3 minutes.
Then dear Barb gets serious.
You think it's my fault, don't you?
Barb, stop it.
Well, as serious as a seriously inebriated person can.
That's what you're all thinking. Why don't you just come right out and say it?
And throws around some allegations.
You think that I drove her away? And if she's dead, you're gonna blame me.
Until Phil cuts her off like a guillotine blade.
You're drunk. Go to bed.
Suddenly reduced to a chastised child, best to just get to bed. Tail tucked betwixt her legs because there's nothing else to go there. Know something that would at least approximate the love she is missing in her life.
Yeah, sure. Fine.
Peter might have some deeper problems. A search for Janice and Claire has been organized, so Jess and Chris arrive to collect Mr. Harrison and Phil. It wouldn't be awkward at all meeting your daughter's secret boyfriend because she happens to be missing, especially when he's such a swarthy, manly fella, a hockey goalie and everything, quick to protect his woman, so possessive in the right way, not like they were hooking up every chance they got. Anyhow, as they head out, Mrs. Mack signs her death warrant.
I just want to tell you that I'm going to go to my sister's for the holidays, so I might not be here when you get back.
While the search is happening, a lone figure, a dejected Peter, plops down near the sorority house. Mind clearly aflutter with failure and girlfriend problems. Nor is it wheedling. With her cab waiting and in highly festive spirits, well-lubricated Mrs. Mack prepares to head out.
Dollies always love to pop.
Only to be distracted by some rather disembodied meowing.
Claude?
A bad decision if there ever was one. She's prompted to climb up the attic ladder.
God damn it, Claude, I'm gonna have you fixed!
Only to wind up in the perfect position for, 1, to see Claire's body, and 2, for the killer to eliminate her with timing and ruthlessness. The look of realization is great. Then just like that, she's drawn up like a pulled pull shade. The killer goes a little mad.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Okay, it's more like he has a conniption fit. Mrs. Mack maybe failed to fulfill his sick, twisted desires. Or maybe killing a woman like her was triggering in other ways. Over at the park, a horrifying discovery is made. Gifts for her under the tree be damned. Janice will never be coming home to open them. A mother's reaction to her daughter's corpse is a sobering sight for a man whose daughter remains missing. Upon returning to the house, Jess is immediately inundated with yet another call from the very persistent moaner.
Hello? Hello?
And his expression of angst or delusion or angsty delusion gets even heavier.
Who are you?
While Jess phones the police about the latest call. It would seem she has a stalker nearing.
Peter, Jesus, you scared the hell out of me.
Since it turns out to be the smiling but sullen Peter.
What kind of a game are you playing? I thought you wanted to talk.
At this point, stalker is probably the right word.
Why don't you quit attacking me and we'll try to have a rational adult conversation?
Everyone's best pal, Sergeant Sergeant Nash, still doesn't take any call from a sorority house seriously, and tells her,
Probably just one of your boyfriends playing a little joke.
Peter has an announcement bordering on a proclamation.
I'm quitting the conservatory and we're getting married.
Not one to bow to pressure, she makes her feelings perfectly clear.
You can't ask me to drop everything I've been working for and give up all my ambitions because your plans have changed.
Peter won't let a little thing like Jess's reservations get in the way of the happy little picture he wants to draw up.
We could be married. You could still do anything you wanted to do.
When something has run its course, well, for better or worse, a conclusion has been reached.
Peter, I don't want to marry you.
Since she's already made her feelings perfectly clear, he refuses to stop grasping at straws. So let the manipulation really begin.
What about the baby?
Lieutenant Fuller questions why the moaner has thus far warranted so little concern. Not even enough for a mention to him, the man in charge.
I didn't want to bother you with it, sir. Oh, you didn't?
With his buffoonery exposed, just when you think his humiliation couldn't be any more complete.
Fellatio? Yeah, it's a new exchange. FE.
Barb's well-orchestrated prank, goof-about, or whatever you want to call it.
New exchange? Yeah, fellatio.
Comes to what is a truly glorious and very satisfying fruition.
One of the girls that was in this afternoon gave it to me.
She gave it to you.
Yeah.
The self-awareness he's been had is a particularly juicy big red cherry plopped right on top.
I know. Something dirty, ain't it?
This bit of humor precedes the film's centerpiece relationships, spectacular disintegration.
You selfish bitch.
A discussion of values maybe should have preceded the genital mashing.
You're talking about killing on a baby as though you were having a wart removed.
Jess's morals allow her to view the pregnancy as a horrible mistake that needs to be rectified.
Now can you see why I didn't want to tell you?
What the hell are you trying to do to me?
What are you doing for yourself?
Peter's values make it so he views it as a valid life with a right to exist.
Let's get one thing straight.
Despite the inconvenience of its arrival.
You are not going to abort that baby.
Peter, you're not going to tell me what I can and cannot do.
That is an irreconcilable difference.
Jess, if you try getting an abortion...
I think you better leave.
If you try getting an
I
abortion...
said get out.
Glowering at her for a solid 5 seconds beforehand, as he would, he of course leaves on a vague threat.
You're going to be very sorry.
The attitude Peter exhibits as he gruffly exits the house without a word.
Hi, Peter.
Entrenches him firmly in Lieutenant Fuller's mind.
I'll get Jess.
As the lead suspect. The cops put a tap on the phone.
Are there any other phones in the house?
Yes, the house mother has a
Yeah, but it's another number and there haven't been any calls in.
With the usual stipulations.
You're going to have to keep this guy on the line as long as possible. We got a mechanical system here and it takes a while.
Peter skulks around outside, a sore loser, not able to reconcile that no matter his personal beliefs, Jess has final say. At the exact same time, up in the attic, Claire's body keeps the moaner, at the moment more like the whiner, company.
Yeah.
So unless he has teleportation abilities, we know him and Jess's distraught ex are mutually exclusive. So, duly noted.
It's okay.
There's a possibility Barb has the power of precognition.
I dreamed a stranger was coming in my room.
Maybe it's all just a coincidence.
I guess that's what gave me asthma.
Barb's asthma attack does lead me to think she should give up smoking, but all things considered, that would be a moot point.
I should be so lucky to have a stranger come in my room.
Barb definitely reflects a deep well of wanting. I would say she should be careful what she wishes for, but that would be too on the nose. With Jess suddenly distracted with a choir comprised of wholesome youths, the moaner makes his move. If you thought Barb was going to wake sobered up and snark the moaner to death,
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
you're about to be as disappointed as she was to go to bed alone.
It's alright, Agnes, it's alright. Shh.
Conceivably projecting a memory being relived, or a delusion in the making, the moaner,
Agnes, don't you tell what we did, Agnes.
poises to strike, and in her final instant, Barb gains sudden awareness of her peril. Before he brings both her nightmare and her dream fantasies into reality, by generously offering up the thrusting penetration she so sorely desired. Jess answers another call, this one monitored by the police. Indicating either multiple personalities,
But your mother and I must know it.
or top-tier improvisational acting skills.
Just like having a wart removed.
What he says last really strikes a chord with Jess.
Oh my God.
Of course, the trace failed.
We didn't get him. Look, there wasn't enough time. You'll have to keep him on the line longer.
Gut itching, Lieutenant Fuller has an inquiry.
Did you recognize something?
No.
Shaken, Jess lies, protecting Peter. And Phil wonders why.
If you think it was Peter, then why didn't you just tell the police?
Women tend to gravitate toward believing the men who have been inside them are basically good.
Well, because I'm not really sure. Well, they should be stopped. Whoever it is should be stopped.
And give them the benefit of the doubt until doubt is absolutely quashed, and sometimes even beyond. Phil questions if the profane moaner's words that seem to mimic Peter's could really be a coincidence.
God, Phil, I don't know. I'm so confused.
But remember, he's been inside her.
I can't believe Peter would do this. He's so gentle most of the time.
With a cop on sentry duty.
Yeah, he's there.
They feel there's no reason to fear.
Yes?
Please help me.
Speak of the devil, a seemingly emotionally unhinged Peter calls and makes another plea.
Jess, we can't go, David. Please, Jess, please.
He doesn't come off like a potential killer at all. And Lieutenant Fuller questions Jess about her unstable boyfriend and his talk of baby killing. She explains about her unwanted pregnancy, and that Peter is a drama nerd given to grandiloquence. To her great relief, Jess comes to the logical conclusion.
That's right, it couldn't be Peter. Phil, it couldn't be Peter, he was here.
Soon after, Phil wanders into getting taken.
Barb, are you awake?
And police discover Peter's tantrum. So the second his alibi doesn't hold water, he'll be right back at the top of the suspect list. When the phone rings back at the sorority house, Jess reluctantly answers, only to get a big dose of the rough stuff.
You fat pig. You pig. You bitch pig.
Well, he's just being mean now, and maybe trying to spark an eating disorder. She's as thin as a rail.
No, really, no.
The moaner really outdoes himself this time around.
No, really, no.
Giving a performance that would chill all but the hardest individuals. This time, the duration of the call was long enough. And Nash gives Lieutenant Fuller the address.
For Christ's sakes, Nash, you got it wrong. That's where the calls are going into.
But nope.
That's where they're coming from, too, sir.
The call's coming from inside the house!
Lieutenant Fuller radios the officer guarding the place, and it becomes clear the killer slipped down and took care of a little business.
Jennings, where the hell are you?
Then, as if he won't flub it all up, he gives Nash very specific instructions.
Don't tell her that the guy's in the house. Just tell her to put down the phone and walk straight out the front door.
Showing why, as a police officer, it's important to prosper good relations with the community, and about as smooth as sandpaper besides, Nash bungles everything.
The caller is in the house. The calls are coming from the house.
Yahtzee, the skullduggery, the foolishness, the obvious comic relief status. I finally figured out who our man Nash reminds me of.
I'd like to know just why the hell there ain't a sign up yonder on that road telling me that the road ends.
Spark plug. Shut up.
When it comes down to it, Jess is too noble to beat a hasty retreat and abandon her sorority sisters.
Jess, get up! And don't go out there!
Despite fright all but overwhelming her. Things have felt amiss this whole holiday season. She thought it had to do with her relationship fizzling out and the byproduct of their failed love. But it was more. It had to do with a scary outsider invading their inner sanctum, without any of them knowing it, culminating in one massive predicament heaped on top of all her other problems. Despite all that, terrified or not, she won't be daunted. The film work in this sequence is top-notch. The use of mise-en-scene is inspired, utilized in a way I would say comprises pretty much the full scope of the varying definitions of that term, making Jess look as if she's a caged bird, and giving insight into her mental space, that she feels trapped into doing what she considers the right thing, notwithstanding all the inherent danger involved.
Running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
To be fair, Jess has a good reason, racing into the Maw of the Beast for the sake of her friends, and she isn't rewarded for her good deed. Finding herself in shockingly close proximity to the killer.
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
practically breathing down her neck.
Agnes, don't you tell what we did, Agnes.
Jess's fight or fight kicks in. And she wastes no time fleeing to the front door, unable to disengage the locks quick enough. She continues fleeing and winds up swept off her feet as the result of hair pulling. Since she consented to none of that, she swiftly puts herself behind a locked door. Then hides out in the basement, unsure where to go. All of a sudden, Peter conspicuously appears outside. She stays out of sight while he makes the worst mistake of his life and commits a little breaking and entering. Pursuing her into a corner, likely because she knew he was in the house for the call she thought absolved him of possible guilt, she seems to assume he's the killer after all.
Jess, you had me worried. What are you doing out here?
Some stuff goes on off screen. As the police arrive, and they soon find a deceased Peter. With a passed out but otherwise alive Jess. A bunch happens and then Jess, unconscious due to sedatives, is left alone in the house. No happy endings in this one. Upstairs, with the undiscovered bodies of Mrs. Mack and Claire, the killer reiterates to himself,
It's me, Billy.
As the film goes to credits, the phone begins ringing once again. Thus, Peter's the fall guy, and the killer has full domain over the sorority house and pregnant Jess. Great police work, Lieutenant Fuller.
I knew it in my gut it was that kid.
So, besides that it's probably a bad idea to give any energy to prank callers, especially ones that skew towards rude and crude, what might Black Christmas be getting at? What with its convoluted higgledy-piggledy ending, high drama, and vile profanity-laced ear pollution, screamed at hot-to-trot young sorority sisters as a precursor, almost a sicko form of foreplay, to their brutal murders.
Well, you know, I'm really getting scared.
Critics of the day would say it was little more than an exercise in exploitation. Upon release, the film's incredible value went mostly unnoticed, unrecognized, and even actively overlooked. For instance, in 1975, A.H. Weiler, writing for the New York Times, revealed his obtuseness. This moody depiction of the Christmas slayings is as murky as the script, which dotes largely on obscenities that are no more pointed than the violence, dull direction, and pedestrian performances. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune, an enemy to horror if there ever was one, rated it a routine shocker, and concluded it was notable only for indicating the junk roles that talented actresses are forced to play in the movies. Not like that's actually a genderless issue.
What? No!
I feel like when art that is redefining comes along, it's difficult for the predominant intelligentsia to recognize and reconcile that their stuffy eyes are seeing something so new and fresh that they don't like it because it's an insult to their hoity-toity sensibilities, only for time to make fools of them for their outmoded views and pretensions. In the 50 years since release, Black Christmas has been rigorously assessed, and is now rightly considered a groundbreaking horror classic.
Name the movie that started the slasher craze. Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, or Psycho. Psycho!
Clearly, Halloween was the first true slasher, but a lot of people consider Black Christmas to be the first. I'll explain what I mean by that momentarily.
None of the above!
See, because it can't be left out of this conversation, Now Ghostface will say Black Christmas.
Peeping Tom, 1960, directed by Michael Powell. First movie to ever put the audience in the killer's POV.
What? Calling Peeping Tom a slasher is
a jaundiced account
of another groundbreaker, but okay. If you notice, those progenitors, honestly, a massive debt of gratitude is also owed to the whole giallo subgenre. Not a one of them were what you would call formulaic. Trendsetters create the situations that become the spokes, gears, and wheels of the formula. The killer's POV is just one such element. Even though pigeonholing it in such a way diminishes all that it accomplished, to me the designation of first true slasher goes to Halloween. That's the one that set the template by being the first knife kill, masked killer, dead teenager horror film that broke through to a mainstream audience in a way that made big studios take notice. Ergo the green light for Friday the 13th, and the glut that followed, making such films big business.
Oh, listen, this guy's minor league.
I suppose what marks a film I would deem a slasher would be any such flick that was made to cash in on Halloween's success, and mimicked that film's overall shape, wink wink nudge nudge, as in using a framework with many or all of the key elements. An organizing principle such as a holiday event or profession, preamble or crime in the past usually containing an opening kill, a masked or otherwise unique killer with a trademark weapon, a soothsayer or harbinger who tries to warn at least one member of the victim pool, inventive kills, a final girl who usually survives, and possibly her love interest, a tour of the dead or variation, and a reveal and unmasking. This paint-by-numbers presentation would ultimately become so predictable, it would take acknowledgement of the audience's growing horror acumen to keep it alive with meta-humor and miscues predicated on defying mapped-out expectations.
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
This may all seem a little, or a lot, pedantic, but I think it's important to bestow respect where respect is due. With its much deeper character depth, and dive into social issues, considering Black Christmas of the slasher species is a little insulting. It's like comparing lakes to oceans, coyotes to wolves. Not that all examples in the slasher subgenre lack strong characterization or fail to delve into social issues, but the majority were designed purely to be thrill rides with no greater aspirations, whereas Black Christmas, at least in a glancing way, seems to have a lot to say about where society had gotten, and that makes for a much more nuanced, girthy, and realistic approach. A perfect indicator that it's a different animal is how greatly it differs from the slasher template. Just a few examples. There's no preamble, no nothing before the story proper begins to indicate any reason for anything. A total improviser, the killer has no signature weapon. And the supposed but never intended moral guidelines associated with slasher films, it lacks those too. Favorites aren't played because characters do or don't make the objectively right decisions, moral and otherwise, making the virginal Claire.
Here without you getting at her all the time. Come on, I know a professional version when I see one.
The first victim of the moaner's tirade, the film signals that even socially conscious cat lovers were on the chopping block, so no one was safe.
You're a real gold-plated whore, Mother.
See you next week.
Okay.
I personally don't think Claire was likely still a virgin. What with having a boyfriend who is obviously infatuated with her, I would say representing the healthier form of that word. But the point stands. What Barb was getting at was that she was a good girl, not prone to promiscuity. But that mattered little. Good girls, bad girls, they were all bad to Billy or the Moaner or whatever you want to call him. A killer far removed from the others in the horror movie villain pantheon by his controlled lack of control, filthy mouth, and undeniable need for validation right up there with what drives streakers, flashers, and other malefactors who use bad behavior to draw attention. It was at this point in the editing that word reached me of the sad passing of Olivia Hussey, our dear Jess. Breast cancer is a pernicious villain, and it was one she was unable to elude forever. I bet she never considered that right around the 50-year mark of the release of Black Christmas she would meet her end. She was only 73. Born in Argentina to an Argentinian tango singer and an English legal secretary, She achieved great heights in her acting career early on, snagging the juicy role of Juliet in the 1968 film adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. A classy topless scene caused a lot of young men's hearts to stir, which was the part the junior high teacher fast-forwarded through when we were shown the film as a reward for reading the play.
Oh, look, Peter, don't cry.
Despite being an early variation of what would come to be called the final girl, at best she had a peripheral relationship with the horror genre, only occasionally dipping a toe.
Besides, this old parlor was starting to look like a lost soul to me.
It seems her other most notable horror role was in Ice Cream Man.
Bye. Always such a happy boy, my little Gregory.
Anyhow, she and her talents will be missed. Rest in peace, dear lady. Rest in peace. I'll end this little tribute with the words of tribute given by Leonard Whiting, who played Romeo opposite her Juliet all those years ago. Rest now, my beautiful Juliet. No injustices can hurt you now, and the world will remember your beauty inside and out forever. Black Christmas achieves a level of anticipation, suspense, and terror that stands up to this day. An all-encompassing feeling a lot of horror films fail to live up to, and I think it comes down to intimacy through proximity, to the killer being in the victim's personal spaces without them knowing, in many cases no farther than a breath away.
God, Jess, I haven't had a minute's sleep around here. There's been so much noise in the house.
Beginning with creeping up on Barb, proximity was utilized to drive home how scary it would be to have a motivated psychopath mere feet or inches away from you, without realizing it before it was too late. This sneaky strategy also revealed his tendency to eavesdrop, a dung-filled fly on the wall, and thus his tendency to play voyeur, which might also be insight into how he came by the storyline he spewed. An observer and listener, tracking comings and goings, gleaning the information he used to remain unobserved as he collected victims, even pushing his luck a couple of times, he was able to always stay one step ahead, all the way to the end. Even with recognizably slasher elements, as I have already argued, Black Christmas is very much a beast unto itself and all its own, and it's due in large part to being centered around a nasty character, as mysterious as he was merciless, a real scourge targeting upwardly mobile young women, and during the holidays no less, something that sure feels like it should be considered sacrilegious. Why end their lives? I would guess a combination of arousal, jealousy, gratification, and trauma. It would seem, at some point he dealt with, and maybe even he himself perpetrated, a great deal of abuse in the form of defilement. Much has been posited about the Moaner, and many, including Bob Clark, have given their opinion as to just who he was, his probable history, and likely motivations. The thing is, nothing the Moaner uttered can be trusted. Was his name actually Billy? Many refer to him as Billy because that's how he self-identifies, but that's assuming a lot. Truth be told, without confirmation, any facet of his true identity is unknowable. Does he have a sister named Agnes with whom he was maybe inappropriate? Who knows? The ambiguity makes it so nothing is certain, and that's a good thing. I would rather not know. I hope it's all lies, misleads, and obfuscation employed as much to bolster his crazy constructs as to toy with his victims. The only instances when he could even be remotely trusted were when he wasn't in any way heard or observed. Which only suggested he was suffering real mental maladies, muddling things even more. Because what's truth when the mind providing the information has no moorings? Again, everything could be his imagined or even, in the case of schizophrenia, his hallucinated construct. He was the definition of an unreliable narrator, thus everything he said needs to be taken with a grain of salt, though his perverse vulgarities give a glimpse into his rather skeevy character, and even skeevier desires. Relatively normal sexual activities can take on sinister undertones when screamed so crudely.
And let me lick your pretty picky cunt.
Or he could be clinically insane, and everything he blathered about complete fantasy, only laced with glints of reality. That's how little about the Moaner can be known, how indecipherable of an enigma he really was, one of the most inscrutable killers in all of horror.
Yeah, sure.
The remake took inspiration from the original's phone calls and brief appearances to weave an entire story around that film's unambiguous Billy and Agnes, a product of incest between Billy and Mommy Dearest.
I know it's not very pleasant, but...
It's an odd one and an odder take, but I give that film kudos for going in a totally different direction by making everything as obvious as a neon sign. But by going that route, they sacrifice what might have been the scariest aspect of the original killer, his total obscurity, which is why I refer to him almost exclusively as the Moaner and not Billy. Like I stated, I don't believe a word he spouts. Show me a birth certificate, a license, some form of identification. Until then, he's a nameless nobody, which, I have a feeling, in his heart of hearts, was exactly how he liked it, being the unknown lurking terror deciding fates at his wonky whim. And why? For all his psychological need for attention, he recognized he was a malignancy, and contradictorily, really didn't want to be seen, not until his victim's last moment, so he could quickly get rid of the one witnessing his sickness. Such conflicting needs make him quite paradoxical, but then that word probably sums him up best, because he seems to ride an edge, that of total insanity and clever deliberation. For such an imbalanced guy, the way he weaved luridness, crude insults, and apparent madness was impressively complex, and made him quite a despicable, deplorable, and depraved individual, even before he suffocated Claire, and showed what a supremely abysmal guy he really was.
He's expanded his act.
Since all his bad behavior was directed toward those of the female persuasion, did he outright hate women? I mean, Peter was upstairs napping.
I was upstairs having a little sleep. I hope you don't mind, but it got a little cold out there waiting for you.
And he didn't go after him, although that could have been due to logistics. Still, he wasn't up to his dirty deeds in a frat house.
I see.
Rageful, vitriolic, denigrating, and an insidious haranguer. Hate factored into it on some level, certainly, but it would seem they also made him afraid of his desires, his confusion, the lack of control they inspired, the very sickness driving him. At the mercy of some enormously sick urges, and playing out the effects of what had to be a rough childhood, chances are he was a victim turned victimizer. That he was an obscene caller who picked up the moniker the Moaner is one of very few details about him that can actually be locked down. Well, besides his undisguised perversity.
You are my fat cock.
How his air of absolute anonymity, his near facelessness, contributed to the menacing atmosphere that surrounded him speaks to a prime universality of fear, that the unknown is always the scariest. That not seen carries whatever face our imagination conjures, which is often more terrifying than any shock put on screen. For all his vagueness, this particular killer comes off as a little realer than the big-name slasher villains, who even in mortal forms often proved improbably strong and unkillable. Not to say the Moaner didn't have crazy person strength. His ability to lift and transport bodies around quickly proved that. As anyone who's participated in moving a passed-out drunken friend can attest, dead weight, due to limb floppiness, is the heaviest weight. Despite that implicit strength, he was smart enough to hedge his bets, employing guerrilla tactics to instigate closeness for swift attack. Allowing a victim too much of a chance might lead to getting thwarted, which he never was, not for long anyway, backing off when it was in his best interest. Undue chances weren't taken, showing for all his madness, he was truly wily. This all plays into the overarching scariness of the film. A creeper considering his every move, in some ways scattered yet still meticulous. The closer he got, the more frightening, since he's always positioning to repel, to spring, to kill.
And then I was just going to get the 7:20 train into the city.
That's how a horror film overcomes believability issues in regard to the killer's capabilities, while maintaining credibility. They don't cheat it by making him inordinately strong, instead relying on orchestration and timing, since with relative strength he didn't automatically have the means within his hands to take control, or snuff out life with the immediacy a less intimate attack would require. He needed to strike when his victims were unaware, vulnerable, and most available. A big kudos. When the time came, they always saw or felt enough to know what was happening. The whole setup, including his mumblings, were also a gross hint at possibilities I still say are better left to speculation. No sense of decency, honor, or decorum drove the moaner, hinting at total moral bankruptcy. I don't think it needs to be known if there was a consensual or non-consensual incestuous relationship. The suggestion is more than enough. Is it a cop-out we never get to see a clear view of the moaner's face? Or get concrete clues of his true identity? If you grew up with the species of slasher that almost invariably gave the villain a face and some history, it could be frustrating. But that plays into the anxiety the entire film builds by offering enough pieces to put together a personal jigsaw puzzle, but not enough for everyone to come up with the same picture. I'll put it this way. Odds of any kind of consensus are nil. Everyone's description of him would lead to very varying composite sketches.
Yep, that stands up to scrutiny.
We don't need to see him clearly. All we need to know is that getting near him is like being beside a venomous snake poised to strike. Whether or not we see the snake is immaterial. All that matters is that we'd feel the fangs. So no, not so much a cop-out, as a brave choice to risk leaving the audience unsatisfied in service of fidelity to concept, and leaving the majority with a lingering feeling of dread. I applaud they utilized a tactic so bold. Blueballing the audience is always a risk.
Oh, Lord.
What little was revealed about the moaner pointed toward a lot of dysfunction. Maybe he had a cursed life, a catch-22 life, a life that led him straight down the path of moral decay, degradation, and depravity. But wait a minute. What's that or any of this based upon? The ramblings of a guy who's crazy enough to get an indefinite stay in the nuthatch, a fellow who spewed filth worse than an exhaust pipe, a man who killed the young and essentially innocent.
Yes, he did. He used several different voices.
One thing that can't be mistaken, with a grossly fractured psyche, whoever he was severely mentally ill, perhaps experiencing a full-on psychotic break. Yet he's methodical, sly, and able to plan and anticipate. So which is it? Was he a berserk, out-of-control lunatic? Or a guileful, calculating, and crafty madman? I think it comes down to which side the coin landed on at the end of any given toss. Loopy or not, he sure was nimble. Nothing I say next should be taken too seriously, because my assessment is armchair analysis at best. But between personal experience with the Void and much research into human abnormality and evil, I think I'm qualified enough to at least devise an entertaining evaluation.
Yeah, sure.
The moaner was brimming with animosity. He'd nurtured his dark side, and it seemed a lot of grudges, hatred, and rage needled him into killing to satisfy deeply ingrained perversity. Self-disgust but also self-pity seemed entwined in his personality. I would say there's a good possibility he lived in real fear, of recrimination, of rejection, of ridicule, of repressed and not so repressed urges. If there's truth in his blitzkrieg ramblings, he suffered abuse and dealt abuse, felt fear and was feared. An innocent child corrupted into an evil man? Or was he a bad seed, an evil youth carrying out evil acts? Or was it that he was just treated that way by abusive parents? This is all well and good, but splitting hairs because, as I pointed out, the character, for all his blather, chatter, and nattering, was completely enigmatic, because no truth could stick to him. This total nature of mystery. I've scoured this film for more clues that prove anything he says or gives even the vaguest hint at his true identity, and have come up empty. Means I can really only conclude he's one thing. A metaphor, a symbol, a character that exists for scares and allegorical purposes. On the one hand, he's the perfect boogeyman, an image of terror and ongoing fear, the interloper concealed in your closet, who can be anywhere. But that's too easy. Does he represent the specter of random death and how it doesn't play favorites? In some way, it's like the film was laying out how different life courses could come to the same end. How a normal child raised with love and protection like Claire could die as horribly as a child brought up with scorn and abandonment like Barb. How even those who might fall in the middle of the extremes like Phil aren't spared, her neutrality signaled by her off-screen death. That's still not good enough. I think more marrow can be boiled out of these bones. I ultimately think the moaner, our dear killer, represents something else. Something in particular related to Jess, Peter, and their hypothetical offspring. It's clear the moaner overheard Peter's wart line and mimicked it back to confuse Jess and muddy the waters.
He repeated almost word for word what Peter said to me tonight. Couldn't it just be a coincidence?
But what if the moaner himself were the personification of the wart? An indicator not all children grow up to be well-adjusted, productive members of society. That some, due to a combination of nature and nurture, grow up to be monsters. And maybe it would be better if they were stopped before their evil can get off the ground.
Aren't you being a little cynical?
Very specifically, could the moaner, or maybe just the character he's adopted, Billy, possibly be representation of the child Jess and Peter would rear if Peter got his way? No mincing words, this whole film comes down to Jess and Peter's fractious relationship, and all their poor decisions. They both made a unilateral choice, but only Peter's would trap Jess for life, not the healthiest prospect, or until what would obviously be an acrimonious divorce.
You selfish bitch.
Unlike in olden times, their sexual relationship did not grant him ownership of her, nor did impregnating her, nor did any of it award him the right to force her hand in marriage. It would be one thing had he proposed with a cheap and symbolic ring, leapfrogging over boundaries and stating matter-of-factly that they would wed, acting like it was set in stone, and entirely without her input, destroyed his case. He offered nothing tangible, no plan, nothing beyond getting married and having a baby, only hollow assurances it would work out. Throw his bad attitude on top of that, I would question if she did want to marry him. To be fair though, we only see the fatigued, stressed out version of Peter, but still, there's indication he wasn't exactly a great guy.
You know I don't like Peter much, but I don't think he's that sick.
This is Phil's man.
Have you got your Santa Claus suit ready?
Yeah. What time do little bastards arrive?
At 1 o'clock.
Terrific.
Which signifies to me she judged people on the merit of their character, not looks. And her assessment of Peter's character was wanting because he gave her reason to see through him. I'm guessing what she saw was him being an older and controlling man in some way taking advantage of her friend. Again, this is pure speculation. What isn't speculation? Jess couldn't be blamed for recognizing that there are a lot of practicalities to life.
What do you expect us to live on, ho?
He wasn't factoring in. What did all of this really demonstrate? How little Peter knew Jess as opposed to how well she knew him. Perhaps he thought with societal norms on his side, it was a no-brainer, and she would automatically fall in line. Since that was literally the polar opposite of what she wanted, it becomes apparent Peter was maybe more in love with an image he created in his mind than the real woman he was dating, because they had dramatically different views. Jess's values were obviously misaligned with Peter's. Luckily for her sake, she possessed the gumption to not let her resolve be eroded by a man throwing around his weight.
But I've got something to tell you.
He conveniently used the pro-life stance to smear her choices with the morality brush. All of this further exposed the shaky foundation on which their relationship was erected. No fence-sitter, just viewing abortion as a solution was maybe an opinion they should have, as I pointed out before, discussed prior to engaging in sexual congress. So both were at fault for assuming their principles were congruous. And as much as I believe in fraternal rights, I also believe the decision resided solely with Jess. She never claimed she'd carry and cultivate his seed, and would rather pull it as a sapling, which is obviously how she was always going to feel about the situation.
I apologize for nothing!
Meeting inflexibility with inflexibility, Instead of being reasonable and trying to have a conversation, when Jess failed to automatically comply and capitulate to his wishes, he had a whole herd of cows and condemned her ruthlessly. When assertiveness gives way to aggressiveness, any chance at a dialogue is often torpedoed, and the red flags fly. So much is debatable, negotiable. There are dimensions to the simplest or most convoluted situations. What am I saying? By immediately framing their situation as decided and not offering options, Peter almost invariably guaranteed Jess would respond unfavorably. Not very cunning or persuasive, certainly not a method that would get her to cave. It's like he couldn't see outside himself enough to consider Jess might have her own autonomy, and would be unwilling to bend to his will. I don't know if that comes down to a misunderstanding, or misinterpreting their bond, or purely male entitlement, but it puts Jess off in a big way.
Be realistic.
A young woman of substance during fast-changing times, when the ladies were coming into their own, Jess was a self-motivated individual with goals, gravity, and desires, outside what was to her probably not the serious relationship Peter took it to be. For her, he was a college stopover who mistook himself for a permanent settlement.
And I told you about some of the things that I wanted to do.
But Jess wasn't settling.
I still want to do those things.
It would seem Jess was disillusioned with him as a man and a person even before he decided to call it quits on the pursuit of his dreams. Had he manned up instead of being an emotional wreck, he might have stopped the moaner in his tracks, and in the process earned his way back into Jess's good graces, maybe even gained enough influence to convince her to keep Junior. Instead, he pushed her into believing he'd gone off the deep end so completely, the only way to protect herself from him, the presumed moaner, was to turn savage with that fireplace poker. That Peter seemed like he wasn't just a male stereotype, not only wanting to take responsibility, but force it, was in some ways a refreshing take, a man so inclined towards starting a family. But that didn't change that he had no right to demand marriage. This reversal of stances really went against the prevailing notion of the times, that the women were more likely to demand marriage, while it was the fellas who wanted to cut and run, and maybe exposes a double standard. For their relationship to even have a prayer, he couldn't hold her in bondage by presuming to make the most important choices of her life for her, when she was perfectly capable of making her own decisions.
I guess it was just kind of getting to me.
In romantic entanglements, any unilateral decisions need to remain small to avoid resentment, not life-changing. Those tend to set in motion a self-destruct sequence. Some would say Peter was trying to force Jess into accountability for her part in creating a life, but she was being accountable. She was taking accountability for her inability to take on the responsibility of bearing and raising a child. Some would say Jess should have acquiesced anyway, for the sake of their relationship, an example of sunk cost fallacy, and the baby, an innocent life that didn't ask to exist, yet existed. In this way, is the film making a negative point about liberated women with free agency going against the social contract? That seems a stretch. Abortion being a controversial and hot topic, it would seem there is some messaging, but I would say it has more to do with how the social contract need not even be a factor when there are plenty of means to circumvent it entirely, in this case with prevention in the form of birth control. Maybe they did use some form of contraception and it failed. The film never makes that entirely clear. All that really matters is that many methods were available to avoid a sticky situation, no pun intended. And since no form of birth control is foolproof, it was incumbent upon them to exhibit utmost carefulness. From experience, not that difficult. The thing is, though, as the one who could actually be impregnated, more responsibility automatically fell to Jess. Since she was willing to exercise her recently acquired right to pursue legal abortion, maybe she should have been on the pill. Also, relatively speaking, a recently attained right. I think we can assume she wasn't, since neither bemoaned that the pill failed. Whatever the failing, all that really mattered was that an inconvenient pregnancy resulted. I use the word inconvenient because for those upwardly mobile young people like Jess, i.e. those in privileged enough positions to be so lucky as to have an ejection switch, An undesirable pregnancy can be treated so callously and flippantly. Both were too stubborn to be adaptable or amendable to the other's stance, and maybe for good reason. Conceding to the other would give neither what they wanted. Both were also selfish.
I can't believe Peter would do this.
But in the end, Jess's selfishness frees Peter, while his keeps her firmly on the hook. Some would argue Peter's selfishness saves a baby. In the most literal sense, yes, that's true. But it would remain to be seen the value of that life when stacked against whatever adversity it would face. Peter claimed,
"We could be married. You could still do anything you wanted to do."
But how realistic would that be with a baby in the mix? Much easier to say and promise than to provide. For all his high hopes, the only guarantee was that there would be an infant in their care.
Will you hear me out, please?
Because she had goals important to her, Jess wanted to free not only herself of responsibility, but Peter too, who still had his music goals when she concluded ending the pregnancy was the optimal outcome. With him being a quitter in mind, tired of the grind.
I'm tired of having to line up behind 6 people every time I want to take a bath. I've had it.
Is it possible his motivations went beyond following societal norms and values? And maybe he was just using the social script as an excuse? Since he's suddenly not so interested in pursuing his dream anymore, and marriage and fatherhood would be a great justification to leave it all behind, without having to take full responsibility for giving up, when the truth was, when the pressure was on, he couldn't hack it in the big leagues? Since misery loves company, and because in light of his failure he needed a new focus that would keep the focus off him, except as a modern liberal father willing to put his life on hold for his child, parenthood was a face-saving excuse. Forcing a family would solve a lot of his immediate problems. I wonder how, were she to remain career-oriented, Jess would be reflected in all that, since society had yet to fully embrace the notion of a woman who put child-rearing second. Even now, that's a notion society hasn't fully embraced. Overly permissive parents and the child-free often getting flack. Peter tried to control the narrative by dredging up decency and decorum, but where was that when it came to having unwed sex to get his jollies? Jeopardizing their future was a mutual decision, and sadly, sometimes a surprise pregnancy signals the end of a union rather than a greater commitment. Something Peter maybe should have considered before dropping loads, or throwing around certainties. Maybe it was the pregnancy in and of itself that made her reconsider her whole relationship with him, perhaps realizing she didn't want to be tied to him. When the decision was made, why even tell him? Was it just that she respected him that much? Unlikely. Or was there something else to delivering that bit of news? What about the awkward timing? Was this an insight she was done with him, so he had better perform to his best and get the future he wanted, because she wasn't going to be part of it? Speculative, but a lot of how she went about things suggests she recognized they had some real issues.
Peter.
Can you just hear me out?
Maybe Jess's stance to get an abortion could be construed as harsh, but what's harsher? Ending a life before it really begins? Or neglecting a life in any of the number of ways a life can be neglected once in the world?
Please, God, no! If you have any shred of decency, you'll stop right there!
As I was saying, this brings us back to the notion the moaner represents the pair's hypothetical spawn. If that were true, what would it suggest? Dysfunction, bleakness, worst-case scenarios. Their union would be bad, their home a turbulent one, a hardscrabble existence for a child or children. How often is a family forged because of an unwanted pregnancy, and even grown with more children in a misbegotten attempt to round out the hard edges, only for the parents' disillusionment to flourish over time instead of abating, until regret consumes them, and resentment infiltrates the whole unit. And to what does that lead? Neglect, abuse, even infidelity. Even if the children are on the surface spared, they're smart enough to pick up on the undercurrent of discord. But what if they weren't so shielded? What if the opposite were true? I think we see the results in the volatile, home-invading, deranged maniac mumbling to himself and anybody who will listen. One who maybe did bad things to a little sister. Any goodness in a person can be evaporated under the hot glare of anger and resentment. And who's often the most resented? unwanted children, those crushed under the weight of blame for being the source of their parents' ruination.
You told me about you wanting to be a concert pianist.
Once subject to mental gymnastics, perhaps Peter would grow bitter and eventually blame his failures on his child.
How it was your greatest dream?
Since for her the child was never wanted, Jess maybe would have eschewed pair bonding and never forged a good relationship with her offspring. What might an emotionally mistreated child do to a younger sibling, especially if there was a perception that sibling received more love? What if she was able to be manipulated? What could she be coaxed into doing?
Pretty Agnes.
What might he do to innocent young sorority girls? You don't dabble in parenthood. It's a full-time job, or some real problems can arise. So in light of all that, would I go so far as to say Black Christmas is somehow a pro-abortion picture? No, I wouldn't be that crass. This film isn't so much a pro-life polemic as a purveyor of the notion that choice is important in a free society, and not all choices are nice ones.
Don't shit me.
It perhaps recognized that if the parents aren't in the game, preventative measures could avert the tragedy of a life driven to the darkest depths. No one ever talks about that had Ted Bundy's mom gotten Teddy Boy removed like a wart, 33 women would have been spared horrendous deaths, including the 12-year-old grade schooler who ensured his ticket to ride old Sparky got stamped. I want to address a verisimilitude issue that plagues this film, namely, that it's unrealistic that the police would retreat from the house and leave Jess entirely alone, without searching and clearing the entire premise, to then evidently fall prey to the killer, undermining the impact of the twist ending. This will look at it from both a story and technical standpoint. In his book Horror Films of the 1970s, Volume 1, horror film scholar John Kenneth Muir makes it apparent he considers the whole ending ludicrous, from Peter's off-screen exit to just being left alone. I would agree it's all rushed, but that mirrors the chaos of many paths converging at once. A college town police department suddenly thrust into the crosshairs of public scrutiny, and how the magnitude of the event would be overwhelming. Besides, the department was only so large. With only so much manpower, certain steps would have to wait. If you pay attention, just being left alone kind of comes down to an oversight.
How long do you think it'll be before I can talk to you? Just a couple questions.
The police discuss when she'll be available for an interview.
Well, she'll be out for at least 4 hours and pretty groggy after that.
Since she's going to be out for a while, she's no good to their investigation until she's alert.
Sorry, but not here. That's what I was saying. Come on, get out.
Perhaps putting two and two together in regard to his daughter's likely fate, Mr. Harrison faints.
If you get him downstairs, he's got to go to the hospital. You should be all right, Mr. Harrison.
I don't think the intent was to leave Jess for long. It just so happens everyone has somewhere to go at the same time. Since they firmly believe the killer neutralized, in everyone's mind there's no immediate danger, no reason for an urgent search of the entire premise. Although a victim clinging to life might have been worth making a circuit to ensure no such survivors remained. Since a medical practitioner had checked out Jess, she was cleared for the time being. Maybe Mr. Muir has too much respect for law enforcement when the film plainly tells us these police aren't the best nor brightest.
The next time you're going to get the gun up your ass. Sideways!
When even Lieutenant Fuller misreads everything so badly he really can't be looked upon as particularly competent, it becomes as clear as a clean window pane that these cops are only so-so at best. Acting under color of law, they have a lot of latitude, so it all comes down to their discretion and wherewithal.
Oh, shit.
Yes, the whole house would need to be searched, but it has already been a long day, involving a search and recovery of a dead teenager, which likely would have involved a huge adrenaline dump for all who participated, plus the murder of one of their own. Not to mention it's the holidays, Christmas time upon them, with its inherent stressors, a time of year that doesn't necessarily prepare people to deal with a massacre on top of everything else. Is it such a surprise that they might bungle the investigation a little, especially when they are under the impression no threat remains? I honestly don't blame them.
What?
It's easy to judge with a modern perspective when we've seen every manner of murder, from grotesque serial killers with high tallies to monstrous mass shooters taking out similar numbers sometimes in a span of minutes. But when this film was released, an event such as the one depicted would be unprecedented, out of the blue, and unparalleled. Clinging to an easy solution would be balm on some blistery cracked lips, and who doesn't enjoy that on a dry cold winter night? As for Peter's demise, the film keeps it ambiguous, but who's to say what precipitated the actions that left him dead? No matter what, he was disturbed, acting irrational. Maybe there was an admission, and a threat. What might he have admitted? Perhaps that her pregnancy wasn't such a surprise to him, because with a little engineering, he purposely baby-trapped her with an oops baby. And what about the threat? That he would do whatever it took to ensure she carried the baby to term? Whether or not Jess believed beyond a doubt Peter was the killer, forceful declarations and a move in her direction would be enough to prompt what happened. And if it spared Jess a life of forced captivity, and a baby being raised to be a monster, it was maybe the best results. The problem is that any of this need be considered at all. Ultimately, the film is a little let down by the mechanics, which failed to pull off the full scope of what should be an absolutely chilling moment. I would say this is because it chose to tell rather than show. Without knowing the exact dynamics, a good enough reason for Jess to outright kill Peter was never presented, except that the film needs him to be blamed and out of the way, so the twist can happen. The problem is that it doesn't even take the most careful reading of the film to know Peter being the guy doesn't make sense. His psychology alone, though brooding, differentiated him greatly from the moaner. So the ending ultimately feels a little off, a little unearned. Still, just because an acrobat sticks the landing a stitch doesn't mean the entire performance was invalidated. Arriving where a film would like us to be is a careful business, and it doesn't always work out as perfectly as one might like, especially when crafting a narrative with certain tics. Despite being a little logically impaired, this one still did a terrific job of offering up chills, shocks, and surprises, and otherwise did a pretty damn good job of building suspense to maximize payoff.
Yes, the girl's father's upstairs, but he can't tell you.
Would you keep it down, please? We've got a sick girl in here.
And it should maybe be pointed out, a guard was left at the front door of the house. This film might also be presenting a warning about security in regard to dwellings and personal choices.
No, seriously, do you realize this is the only door and window in this whole house that's locked?
It's interesting that the film seems to make a point that your security measures had better be in place before an invader gets in. Once that's happened, those measures can trap you inside with the killer. Jess locking up once it was too late only increased her likelihood of victimization, a powerful message about being leery about enemies already within, be they former lovers or complete strangers. Is this point about security or lack thereof maybe making some greater point about the permissive college experience? A sort of analogy for how it can lead to danger when we're too liberal, because when we don't lock our doors and windows, put up safeguards, personal and otherwise, interlopers can wander into our lives. Strangers or scallywags can crawl through our unlocked windows. The moaner only had to scale a trellis to enter the attic. With some drive and charm, Peter was able to climb through Jess's window. But then maybe that's a stretch for a kick-ass trailblazing suspense fest that devised and rewrote many of the tropes that would sustain the slasher subgenre through the 1980s.
Why did you just get out of here?
Working on this video made me realize that, funnily, at this point a lot of Christmas music has creepy connotations to me. And it's not just because of the Christmas horror films either. Sometimes even mainstream films do a good job of capturing the creepy. Now I've about reached the end of the rope, so I won't leave you dangling.
Right.
Thanks for humoring my ramblings. Please share any refutations, opinions, accusations, japes, or other ideas in the comments below. and please check out whatever I'm up to next time. And just remember, if this one doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight. Bye now!
Bye, creepy man! Keep it creepy!
He's a weird guy.
Goodbye!